What's up, mobile devs? I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much, Theodore, for having me at this amazing React Native London conference. So this will be a talk about animations. Just a very quick introduction about myself. I'm Enzo. I absolutely love animations, and I absolutely love to craft animated experiences with React Native. But to be honest, this hasn't always been the case. Actually, I started my experience with Swift, and this was because in 2018, I joined the Apple Developer Academy. At the time, I was extremely lucky because there were only 3 different academies. The first one was in Porto Alegre, Brazil. The second one was in Jakarta, Indonesia. And the third one was in Naples, Napoli, my hometown, the city where pizza was invented. And I was extremely lucky because people were coming from all over the world, but I just had to cross the street to learn about native development. And here, the way we got taught about building a native app was through a framework called the CBL, Challenge-Based Learning. Basically, there were a lot of different teams. We were trying to compete against each other with our apps. There was no money involved, but the competition was real. And our first app, which is also my first app, was named Farticles. So Farticles was meant to be entertaining. The main idea was that people were able to upload their fake articles, some fake news, and everyone was able to vote for the funniest one, the most creative one, and so on. And I mean, the idea was quite interesting, but unfortunately we lost. And it was very hard to accept, but I think that you are really not going to need an eye for detail to understand what actually went wrong. At the time, though, to be honest, I didn't have any design experience. I had an engineering background, and I've always seen software defined as a sum of its features. And the feature, in my opinion, was defined just by the utility that the feature was bringing. So I was very careful about the amount of features. But if you only care about the amount of features, of course, it will not make sense to create an app because you can just create a website, fill it with as many features as you want, and it will just work. So how come so many people prefer to use apps? There was something that I was missing, and I was definitely missing the sense of delight. A feature cannot be defined only by the utility that the feature is bringing. A feature has to be defined also by the sense of delight. To be very honest with you, this formula doesn't quite work yet because we are putting the utility on the same level of delight, and that's not always the case. Of course, it depends on the kind of app that you're building. If you're building a banking app or a crypto app, delight will matter because you want to create trust with your users. But of course, if you're not able to send money or to receive money, it will matter a bit more. And on the other hand, if we think about social apps or games, everything is completely opposite here because here, I mean, games, for instance, are meant to be entertaining and are meant to be delightful. The sense of delight matters way more. So to fix the formula, we need to define somehow the importance of the utility and the sense of delight. The formula seems a bit abstract, but it works quite well when you want to understand whether to build a feature or not. And here you can assign the weights based on your target audience or on the kind of product that you're building. So unfortunately, a few months later, I took some time and I decided the weights, everything here is very subjective. And I realized that basically Farticles was meant to be joyful and entertaining. It was meant to be delightful. But I have to say that at the time, unfortunately, we just rushed. We tried to create a ton of different features, and it was way more important to focus just on 2 features with, 2 well-crafted features, 2 decent features. This was an amazing lesson that I got from the academy, but then of course it happened. I started working with React Native. It was 2019. I joined a consulting agency, and I quickly realized that there was absolutely no time for delight. I mean, React Native was very different than how it looks today. It was 2019. There were just so many issues. I remember upgrading React Native was almost impossible. Dealing with list and keyboard was painful. And what about animations? Animations were already performant thanks to the work behind Reanimated the version 1, but the declarative API never really clicked, at least for me. But it's unbelievable to think about the amazing improvements that have happened over the past few years in React Native. All of these issues have been completely solved, and what's pretty unique to the React Native community is that some of them haven't been solved by big companies, but have been solved by individuals. Today is a joy to use a fast list, thanks to the amazing work done by Jay behind the legend list. And dealing with keyboard is as simple as installing React Native Keyboard Controller from Kirill-Zusko. And what about animations? Animations became first-class citizens with the reanimated V2. It was 2020 with the amazing announcement done by Software Mention. So today, but since many years, I feel like it's safe to say that React Native is objectively the best options to build apps. And I mean, thank you. I have the feeling somehow, that some of you agree with the statement, right? Not really a controversial statement at a React Native conference. But what's really surprising, in my opinion, is that somehow I have also the feeling that LLMs agree with this statement too. It's unbelievable how easy it is to spin up an Expo project, a React Native project with AI. And this really motivated me to try to give to articles a second chance. I took 5 minutes of my time. I asked a couple of questions to Claude, and really, after 5 minutes, the result wasn't just better than the one that took me a lot of time in the past years, but was also targeting multiple platforms thanks to the amazing work and the philosophy behind Expo and React Native. But when I asked to my friend Claude to add a tiny bit of the light, the result didn't quite match my expectations. And I realized that, no matter how long it has been, building the light still requires craft and will probably forever. So now that we know why the light matters, the real question is, how do we add the light in React Native? This is a question that I tried to answer for the past 3 years and led me to create Demos. Demos is an open source collection of more than 100 animations built on top of reanimated gesture handler and Skia. So I have to be honest, there is not a lot of creative work behind the scenes. All of these demos, not all, but a great part of them, are inspired by some very talented designers. And here what I'm trying to do is trying to be inspired by them and try to replicate the sense of the light by using React Native. So with demos, I can't really answer to the general question, but at least I can try to share with you what were the most common patterns that I tried to use over the past few years to replicate a delightful experience. I tried to do that in the most reliable way. So I created a second repo, which is called the demo stats. And this repo is basically watching on a daily basis what happens on demos. It is cloning the repo, it is scanning all the tokens, checking what are the most common functions, the most common patterns, the hooks, and so on. And everything gets pushed on a website called stats.reactive.io. This is a vibe-coded website, but it was good enough for the purpose. And you can filter by data, you can check what are the most common functions that I've been using. I'm totally aware, of course, that this has no statistical significance, but still, there are some super valuable insights, at least in my opinion. And I just want to highlight some very small quick wins that you can try to grab from there and try to apply in your React Native app to gain some instant sense of delight. So the first quick win lies around the use animated scroll handler hook. This is an amazing hook that you can access and you can take from Reanimated. It is needed to track the scroll offset on the x-axis and on the y-axis. So to be practical, we can have a look at these two animations. And here it is almost obvious that we want to animate based on the x-axis and on the y-axis. On the first one, for instance, we are animating the rotation of the cat avatar based on the x-axis. So we are tracking the scroll offset. And on the second one, we are animating the percentage at the very bottom component by tracking the y-axis. But I have to say there are not many of these demos. It's not that obvious. And somehow I found out that I was using this hook in more than 20% of the repo. So I took some time to investigate that, and I found out that I was really using a lot a pattern called invisible scroll views. So to be practical again, we can have a look at these three animations. Here it isn't that obvious that we might want to track the scroll offset. Intuitively, I would think to just use a lot of different pan gesture handler to have full control over each single card. But what is really happening behind the scenes is that there is an invisible scroll view. And using an invisible scroll view is just going to be way easier because we are going to use one single shared value to animate all of the cards. But what I want to highlight is that by default, you're going to have a delightful experience because the experience will match the native experience. So we are going to have the same deceleration rate for iOS and Android, and we are also going to have the typical rubber band effect that we have in iOS for free. The second finding, the second quick win instead, lies around the timing and spring animations. I found out that I was preferring timing animations over spring animations. And when I saw that, I just panicked. I panicked because a few months back I was at the App.js, I was telling to the audience, you have to use spring animations, you have to prefer spring animations. And then I was just finding out that I was basically using timing animations more often. So to be very clear, that's not a general rule. The general rule that I usually try to apply is that if you're animating a static property, such as the opacity or the background color, go with the timing animation. But if you're trying to animate the motion of an object, or if you're trying to animate some transform property, you have to prefer spring animations. So I just thought, well, maybe in demos I don't have a lot of transform animations, but I also found out that more than 80% of them were using the transform property. So of course, this data didn't really make sense for me. And I tried again to investigate the issue, and I found out that I was just being lazy. The truth is that timing animations are so convenient to set up. You can define a timing animation based on duration, and you're good to go. But when you try to define a spring animation, sometimes it feels like you need a PhD in physics to get the perfect balance between the mass, the damping, and stiffness, and you waste a crazy amount of time, and in the end, the result is not even good. So luckily, things have changed recently with the amazing announcement done by Software Mentioned with Reanimated v4. In Reanimated v4, you have the option to define spring animations based on the perceptual duration. And defining spring animations is way, way easier. You can combine the perceptual duration with the damping ratio. The damping ratio will define the bounciness. And I mean, it can feel a bit overwhelming, to be honest, but it's so easy to use. If you want to have some bounciness, go with a damping ratio that is less than 1. If you want no bounciness at all, go with a damping ratio equal to 1, and that's really it. If you really know what you're doing, go with a damping ratio greater than 1, but I usually wouldn't recommend to do that because the animation will feel a bit sluggish. So I took some time, and in 30 minutes, I was able finally to fix my mistakes. And finally, the data started to make sense because, of course, you have to prefer spring animations if you are trying to animate something based on motion. So the third quick win, which is not that surprising, but it's definitely the most important one, lies around the custom pressables. All of the demos are using custom pressables. I strongly believe that tap interactions are crucial, and to highlight that, I want to quote Nikita Beer, who right now is the head of product of X, and he's mentioning in his tweet that if you're somehow building a social app, you need to treat every single tap interaction as a miracle. I totally agree with this statement. I think that you can extend this statement to every kind of apps, but somehow in React Native today, there is still the lack of UX defaults. If you think about someone that is just getting started with React Native and wants to add some tap interaction, they will probably just use the touchable opacity. If you're an experienced developer, you might want to prefer the pressable. You might want to animate the pressable with the reanimated by creating your own custom pressable opacity, pressable scale. You can go very fancy with this and create also the pressable rotate if you want to. But what can very easily happen if you're not careful is that all of your animations, all of your tap interactions are going to feel inconsistent. And on top of that, when you're going to scroll through your list, you're going to get this very weird behavior, this very weird flickering caused by the conflict between a tap interaction and a scroll view. So I truly believe that if you want to create delight, you need to have strong foundations, and the strong foundations lies around the tap interactions. You really need to care about them. So I took some time and I tried to fix the issue for demos at the very beginning by creating a very small package called Presto. Presto comes with a very simple idea. The idea is that tap interactions have to be consistent by default. So by default, Presto comes with the two basic pressables, a pressable scale and a pressable opacity, and also lets you create some custom animated pressable if you really want to. But the general rule is that all of them are based on the same animation curve that you can change if you want to, but all the same animation curve will be applied to all of your touchables. So on top of that, Presto is built on top of the React Native gesture handler base button component. This was an amazing tip that I got from Herbud. Thank you so much, really. Because, I mean, by using a base button from React Native gesture handler, you can take your touchables, you can put them in any kind of list you want. You can define the render scroll component property by using a scroll view from React Native gesture handler. And finally, you will have a perfect list with no conflicts while scrolling, and you will finally have a native experience. So this is amazing, but are we really talking about pointless animations? I mean, animations are pointless by definition, but I think we can easily agree that the animation at the left is somehow a bit less pointless than the animation at the right. So you can think about them as a pointless animation, as a pointless pro animation. This distinction works, but I like to think about them as a functional animation and memorable animations. So functional animations are pointless animations that the user somehow is expecting. So when I tap on a button, I do expect something to happen. Memorable animations on the other end are animations that the user isn't really expecting. When I tap on a QR code, I don't expect at all a 3D rotation. And over the past few years, I found out that Skia is the signature of memorable animations. This statement alone doesn't have a lot of value because Skia has so many tools, so many components. You can really do a lot of things with Skia, and it's somehow so hard to get started. But what really surprised me was the fact that in the past 3 years, more than 50% of my React Native animations were built on top of the Skia path component, which turned out to be one of the most flexible components I've ever thought about. So to be practical, we can have a look at these objectively pointless pro animations if you want to. And here, these animations look quite different objectively, but all of them are based on the same technique. There is a Skia path, there is an animated Skia path. I don't want you to let with the idea that Skia is needed only for pointless pro animations. You can use it also to build some very interesting animations that can be inspired from some real use case demos. And I also don't want you to let with the idea that you only need a Skia path. What I want to highlight there is that using a Skia path is a great idea if you want to structure your animation, but then it makes a lot of sense to still use the other Skia components. In this specific case, for instance, I'm using a Skia path to define the 4 rounded rectangles, and then I'm applying a backdrop filter, in this specific case, a backdrop blur. Here, again, I'm using a Skia path to define the donut, but then I'm applying a blur mask, a shadow, and a radial gradient. So using a Skia path is just one of the possible ways to structure a Skia animation. And I think that I can't talk about memorable animations without mentioning at least the shaders. Shaders are going to achieve the magical effect always, but they require objectively a very different programming model. So far we talked about why the light matters, we talked about how to add the light in React Native, and we talked about how to build pointless animations. But we haven't yet answered the most important question, which is why pointless animations matter. So to answer to this question, in my opinion, we have to rethink what actually a software is. A software isn't just defined by the sum of its features. A software is all about communication with your users. And apps, in my opinion, are the most effective way to communicate something with your users. So when we have a look at these two demos, we shouldn't really think which one is pointless pro, and so on. We should try to understand what these two animations are trying to communicate. The first one, in my opinion, is communicating attention to details, which is of course critical. But the second one is communicating that the team that worked behind this demo really cared a lot to surprise their users, which is a way more powerful message, at least in my opinion, of course. So over the past few years, I was extremely lucky. I had the luck to work with some very talented designers, and I found out that great designers love to build memorable animations. So what I really hope is that after this talk, the next time that a designer in your team will come with yet another absolutely pointless animation, you're really going to put all of your heart in it, all of your effort, because of course, pointless animations matter. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Awesome.